A little girl named Mia, walking home from school, notices a white homeless man sitting on a park bench. He sits lost in his thoughts, his eyes full of unspoken pain. Without thinking, Mia decides to share her sandwich with him, a simple, but so important at that moment, act of kindness. But Mia could not know that this seemingly insignificant act would set off a chain of events that would change everything. The next day, when the police unexpectedly knock on their door, Mia and her mother can't imagine what awaits them on the other side. What secrets were revealed by one small act of compassion, and how is this stranger connected to what now hangs over their family? Stay tuned to unravel the mystery that began with a simple sandwich, but led to consequences that will change their lives forever. Before we begin this mystery story, please let me know in the comments where you are watching us from, and if you enjoy this story, please don't forget to subscribe. In the heart of the bustling city, among the shadows of high-rises and the sounds of traffic, 8-year-old Mia lived with her mother, Angela. Their modest apartment was their refuge from a world filled with stress and hardship. Each day, Mia returned from school with a bright, unfailing enthusiasm. Her mother worked hard to provide the best she could, but their life was far from rosy. One day, as soon as the school bell rang, Mia hurried to the park, her favorite place to play and relax. She was especially happy that day, as she managed to find an old, but almost new book, which she was going to read in the evening. When she approached her favorite place in the park, a bench under a large oak tree, her gaze lingered on a stranger. The man sitting on the bench was dressed in tattered clothes. His hair and beard were tangled and dirty. His eyes, raised to the sky, seemed tired and lost. Mia immediately sensed that there was something more to this man than just his misfortune. His presence seemed to disturb her normal world, and this made her feel strangely uneasy. Trying to suppress her fears, Mia walked closer. She noticed that the man not only looked hungry, but also seemed to be deep in thought. His gaze was gloomy. Thinking that the sandwich her mother had made for his afternoon snack might help ease his mood a little, she approached the man. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice shaking with emotion. The man looked up, surprised by the unexpected attention. His blue eyes, hidden under thick eyebrows, were full of mystery and alertness. "Yes, child," he replied, his voice rough but with hidden pain. Mia held up the sandwich, trying to smile. "I thought you might be hungry. Please take it." The man hesitated, but seeing the sincerity in the girl's eyes, he took the sandwich with quiet gratitude. As soon as he tasted it, his expression changed, with unexpected relief. He became much calmer, but it is not entirely clear what exactly changed in his internal state. Mia, not knowing what to do next, wished the man a good day and returned home. However, when she entered the apartment, her mother was already waiting for her with an anxious expression on her face. "Mia, the police just came to our house," Angela said, her voice full of excitement. "They're looking for information on a man you might have seen in the park." Mia froze, her heart beating faster. Why were the police interested in this man, and what connection could there be between his life and the unexpected visit of law enforcement? The next day, when Mia went to the park again, she noticed that everything around her had changed. The bench was empty, and on it was a note addressed to her. She slowly unfolded it and began to read, her heart beating faster as the words on the paper revealed that her kindness had attracted the attention of people she had never imagined. The note began, "If you're reading this, it means our plan worked. What you did was of great importance, but now you must understand how deep this has gone." The story continued to unfold, and Mia felt that her life was entering a new, unknown phase, full of mysteries and unpredictable turns. Mia carefully folded the note, her heart still pounding in her chest. The note was written in neat handwriting, but every word seemed to be filled with some hidden meaning. She decided to show the note to her mother, but immediately, remembering that her mother was very wary, she decided to figure out what was going on her own first. She walked back to the park, trying not to attract attention. Even the smallest details had changed the park's atmosphere. A few new benches that no one had seen before, and unusual faces flitting among the trees. She sat down on the same bench where she had met the man and looked around curiously. The note left more questions than answers, and Mia knew she had to solve this mystery to understand how it related to her actions. As she sat there, her gaze fell on an old slab, almost hidden under the grass, which looked as if it had been forgotten there many years ago. Mia walked up to it and noticed that there was a small hole under the slab. Gathering her courage, She stuck her hand into the dark space and felt something cold and hard. It was an old metal key. With trepidation, Mia pulled up the key and examined it. It was covered in rust and looked quite old, but there were strange symbols etched into its surface that Mia couldn't recognize. She put the key in her pocket and decided to go back home to ask her mother, but to her surprise, she found that her mother was already busy sorting out her things. Angela, noticing her daughter's worried look, sat down next to her. Mia, unable to resist, told about the key and the note. Showing her find, Angela's face changed. Her usually calm expression became tense. Mia, this key is part of a family heirloom I haven't mentioned. My mother said it was connected to some ancient secret, but I don't know how you came to have it. Mia was shocked. What is this secret, and why are the police interested in this man? Angela sighed and began to explain with difficulty. My mother was part of an old society that was dedicated to protecting secrets related to ancient artifacts. This key may be linked to one of these artifacts that has been guarded for generations, and I'm afraid that if you have it, it may mean that someone is trying to find something more. Her mother's words echoed in Mia's mind. It was as if reality itself was changing before her eyes, and an ordinary sandwich became a link between her world and long-forgotten mysteries. The next day, Mia and Angela decided to investigate the origin of the key. They found in old family records a mention of a castle that was located outside the city, in a dense forest. It was an old mansion that no one remembered for a long time. They headed to the mansion, the path to which was hidden under thick trees. The castle looked abandoned, with cracked walls and overgrown windows. Mia and Angela found an old door that seemed to fit their key. When they inserted the key and turned it, the door creaked open, revealing a dark hallway. Walking down the hallway, they came across a room full of old books, paintings, and artifacts that were covered in dust. In the center of the room stood a large table with several ancient manuscripts and various strange objects. One of the manuscripts caught their attention. It was open, and on the page was a map with markers pointing to various places, possibly related to the key. Mia and Angela looked at each other. The realization that their find might be connected to something bigger than they had imagined was washing over them. But the mystery was just beginning, and many questions remained unanswered. Mia and Angela studied the manuscript and the map carefully. The map indicated several locations, each marked with strange symbols. One of the marks caught their attention. It had a symbol similar to the one on the key. Mia couldn't help but feel excited. Their investigation was just beginning. Angela, noticing the confusion on her daughter's face, tried to calm down and said, "We must be careful. This castle may contain more secrets than we can imagine. Perhaps we should find information about each of these places." Deciding to start with the first pointer on the map, they returned to the city and began asking locals about the place marked on the map. It turned out to be an old mansion located on the outskirts of the city, which many years ago had been a private museum, but now its condition left much to be desired. It was said that exhibits related to the history and culture of the region were kept there. When Mia and Angela arrived, they found the mansion abandoned and dilapidated, but to their surprise, they discovered that the door was slightly open, as if someone had recently entered. They carefully entered and began to explore the premises. The rooms were filled with dust and cobwebs, but in one of them they found ancient paintings and figurines, which they believed were part of the museum's collection. One of the paintings had the same strange symbolism as the map. Mia and Angela looked at it closely. The painting depicted an ancient ritual that used the same symbols as the key in the map. At the bottom of the painting was writing in a language that Mia couldn't decipher, but Angela guessed it might be an ancient spell or ritual. As Mia explored the mansion, she noticed that a small box was buried in one of the rooms. She took it out, and when she opened it, she found ancient documents and several items inside, jewelry and amulets that were clearly of historical value. The documents were written in an ancient language that Mia couldn't read, but Angela, who had studied history at university, found references to ancient rituals and spells. They spoke of the safekeeping of some powerful artifact that had been hidden for centuries and guarded by complex mechanisms and spells. Among the documents, they found an old note that mentioned a man named Nikolai Welch, who was a famous explorer in the late 19th century and may have been the last person to look for the artifact. The note said that the artifact was divided into several parts and hidden in different places. Mia and Angela realized that the key Mia had found could be related to finding one of these parts. The realization that they were dealing with something far more complex and dangerous than they could have imagined filled them with both fear and excitement. In the evening, when they returned home, they decided to study the documents and the note more carefully. Angela discovered that one of the notes mentioned a secret society that once protected such artifacts. Perhaps this society was connected with those who were looking for this artifact, and they may know more about its location. The next morning, Mia noticed that someone had been in their apartment. Things had been turned upside down and some documents were missing. Panic gripped her and her mother. Someone was clearly trying to get what they had found. Their investigation was just beginning, and although they could not be sure who was behind it, one thing was clear: their path was full of dangers and secrets. They decided to continue searching and solving riddles that could lead them to ancient secrets, and perhaps to the solution to what was hidden in the key that was in their hands. Mia and Angela, shaken by recent events, realized that their adventure had become dangerous and required caution. Feeling the pressure of time, they decided to seek help from historians and archaeologists who could shed light on ancient symbols and references in documents. They went to the local archive, where, fortunately, an expert in antiquities worked, Professor Selina Riley. Professor Riley, after studying the documents, noted with interest that the symbols on the key and in the manuscripts were associated with ancient rituals that were used to protect and hide powerful artifacts. She explained that secret societies often used such rituals to protect treasures from prying eyes. The professor also confirmed that Nikolai Welch was indeed a famous explorer who was engaged in the search for such artifacts. However, despite this useful information, the professor warned that searching for such artifacts can be dangerous. She spoke about cases where people encountered ancient traps and mechanisms protecting artifacts that could lead to serious consequences. As Mia and Angela continued to explore, their situation became increasingly tense. At night, they were troubled by the feeling that someone was watching them. Noisy footsteps outside the door and unclear sounds became more frequent. Angela tried to calm Mia down, but even she could not hide her fear. One evening, after they returned home from the archive, they discovered that all the documents they had saved were gone. All that was left in their apartment was a note that read, "You are looking for something that is not meant for you. Give back what you have found and do not try to go any further." Fear and anxiety overwhelmed Angela. She realized that their lives could be in danger and decided that their investigation should be suspended. But Mia, determined to find out the truth and help her mother, insisted on continuing the search. A few days later, after a night of fear and worry, Angela and Mia headed back to the mansion. They found that someone had done some restoration work on the old mansion. It looked less abandoned, and there were guards on the property. This only confirmed their suspicions that someone else was interested in the finds. Among the suspicious people who were in the vicinity of the mansion, Mia noticed a woman who seemed familiar. It was a young woman with disheveled hair and a sad look, who seemed to be there by chance. Mia recognized her as Irina, an old friend of her mother who had disappeared many years ago. Irina had been seen in the area in recent days, but no one knew where she had been all this time. Mia decided to approach Irene and ask her about what was happening. Irene told a story that turned their understanding of what was happening upside down. It turned out that she was part of a secret society that was looking for the artifact along with Welch. She and her colleagues were hiding from the authorities and those who wanted to use the artifact for selfish purposes. Irene came to warn Mia and Angela about the real threat. Not everyone was benevolent, and their search could put them in danger. As they discussed this, Irene shared a personal story that was particularly touching. She spoke of her losses and trials, how she had lost loved ones and her only son because of her search for the artifact. She had been searching for it for many years, and although her search had been unsuccessful, she had not lost hope that everything would end well. Irene explained that the artifact could be connected to her son, and she wanted Mia and Angela to know that sometimes, despite all efforts, not everything can be changed. This story touched Mia and Angela's hearts. They realized that their own actions could have had unintended consequences for those around them. In their search for the truth, they began to think about the value of human life and how far they would go for something that might be too big to understand. Mia and Angela, touched by Irene's story, decided to use their knowledge and resources to help her search for her son and to find out how these events connected to their own efforts. Their journey became more personal and emotional, and they knew that their journey would be long and difficult. But perhaps they could find answers that would not only help them, but also bring peace to those who had suffered so much in their search for the truth. Mia and Angela returned home, their minds filled with Irene's story and a new sense of responsibility. They realized that their own investigation was part of a larger picture, in which human destinies are intertwined with the secrets of the past. Their determination to help Irene and uncover the truth about the ancient artifact only grew stronger. The next step was to figure out how Irene and her colleagues could find her son and how it related to their current search. They decided to go back to the documents they had managed to save before they were taken. They pored over them, looking for any clues on how to proceed. Angela began to decipher the records that had been preserved. Using her skills in ancient languages, she discovered that the artifact in question was not just an object of power, but had a special significance in maintaining the balance between the dark and light forces. The records indicated that the artifact was divided into parts, and each piece was guarded in its own place. Finding all the pieces of the artifact would mean solving the riddle that was tied to maintaining peace. Mia decided to do some research on the locations on the map. She and Angela began looking for old sources and records to find out what these places were. Mia discovered that one of the locations was connected to a long-closed observatory located in the woods nearby. This observatory, built in the early 20th century, was once a center for astronomical research, but was eventually closed. When they arrived at the observatory, they found it in a sorry state. The old, mossy building seemed untouched by time, and the windows were boarded up. With difficulty, they made their way inside and began to explore the abandoned premises. In one of the rooms, they found an old telescope and several notes that had been written by the astronomers working there. Angela and Mia found references to celestial observations among the records that could be related to the location of the artifact's parts. The documents contained astronomical maps and calculations that could indicate the location of the next piece. The next place on their list was an old underground labyrinth that was once used to store treasures. When they arrived at the place, they faced a problem. The entrance was filled in and blocked. Mia and Angela began exploring the area to find another way to get in. After hours of searching, they found a hidden entrance covered in rocks and debris. After struggling to get inside, they discovered a labyrinth filled with ancient traps and mechanical devices that once served to protect the vault. As they moved through the labyrinth, they encountered several dangerous mechanisms and puzzles that required their attentiveness and ingenuity. Eventually, they found a small room where a piece of the artifact was hidden, enclosed in an ancient chest. Retrieving the artifact piece proved to be a difficult task. The chest was secured with a complex lock that required the symbols to match exactly. After several attempts, they were finally able to open the chest and find a piece of the artifact inside that looked like an ancient medallion. When Mia and Angela returned home, they continued to study the medallion and other finds. They realized that each element of the artifact was associated with a specific astronomical event or star position. This confirmed their suspicions that the artifact was not just a powerful object, but part of a complex system that required precision and knowledge. Meanwhile, Irene continued to search for information about her son using what they had found. She discovered that her son was connected to a secret society that guarded the artifact, and that his disappearance was due to someone trying to use the artifact for their own gain. Mia and Angela continued to research and plan their next steps. They knew they had a long way to go, and that they would have to solve many puzzles and overcome many challenges to collect all the pieces of the artifact and uncover its secret. But they also knew that their efforts could lead to new discoveries and help Irina find her son. Each day of their search reminded them that each solved mystery brought them closer to the truth, but also to new challenges. They felt that their investigation had become more than just a search for an artifact, but part of a larger mission to preserve historical heritage and protect those who needed their help. Mia and Angela's investigation became increasingly dangerous. They began to realize that every step they took brought them closer to unraveling ancient mysteries, but also increasingly put their lives and safety at risk. Their interactions with Irene and the discovery of new facts only added to the complexity of their difficult situation. One evening, when Mia and Angela returned home after visiting the archive and solving more riddles, terrible news awaited them. There was a letter on the table in their apartment. It was written on old parchment and had familiar symbols. After reading it, they realized that it was a warning. "We know what you're looking for. Your actions have led to violations that will not go unpunished. Be prepared for what comes next." Mia's heart pounded with fear. They knew the threat was real and they had to be prepared for anything. The next morning, they received even more terrible news. Irene called them in tears and told them that her son had been found dead. It was related to their investigation, and although the details were still unclear, Irene was certain that his death was the result of someone wanting the artifact. Her son's death was a catastrophe for Irene, and Mia and Angela felt deep guilt that their actions could have led to this outcome. In her mourning state, Irene asked for their help in arranging the funeral. Mia and Angela supported her, but their own feelings of guilt and fear that their investigation could have such dire consequences made their actions even more painful. At Irene's funeral, amidst the grief and sorrow, they met many people who knew her son and understood the importance of his work. Mia and Angela learned that her son was not only an outstanding researcher, but also a man who risked his life to find the truth and protect others. This only strengthened their resolve to see this through to the end. Irene's death was a turning point for Mia and Angela. They decided they had to continue their investigation. Despite the dangers, they reconsidered their methods, began using more covert means, and took security measures to protect themselves and those who supported them. Their next goal was to unravel the connection between the artifact and the mysterious society that they believed was orchestrating all of these events. They discovered that this society had ancient roots and a complex hierarchy, and that its goal was not only to protect the artifact, but to use its power for its own purposes. One night, while searching, Mia and Angela were once again threatened. Their apartment was attacked again, but this time it was more serious. They found signs of a break-in and evidence that indicated that someone was indeed following them and trying to hinder their search. Mia and Angela, realizing that they were risking their lives and the safety of those around them, decided that they had to act with the utmost caution. They contacted several trusted people who could help them in the fight against those who wanted to use the artifact for their own purposes. Meanwhile, Irene was determined to uncover the truth about her son's death and find out who was behind it. She continued to investigate and found new clues that pointed to a wider network of people connected to the society they had already heard about. The story of Mia, Angela and Irene became more and more tragic. Their path was full of loss, grief and danger. Each discovery and each new knowledge brought with it more questions and threats, but they continued to move forward, motivated by the goal of revealing the truth and preventing possible catastrophic consequences of using the artifact. Their struggle against the shadows of the past and their own inner demons became more and more real, and while their research could lead to new discoveries, they also understood that each mystery solved could have a price, and that their destiny was inextricably linked to this ancient and dangerous legacy. Mia and Angela continued their efforts despite the looming danger and personal losses. Their work became increasingly intense and risky. They began a new phase of investigation, trying to understand how their findings connected to a larger plan and a secret society that they now knew was active and powerful. One foggy morning, as they were once again deciphering ancient symbols, their world was turned upside down again. On the table in their apartment lay a new letter. It was written with the clear intention of intimidating. You continue to search for what should not be found. The consequences will be even more terrible. From then on, everything began to seem even more threatening. Mia and Angela knew that their every move was under close surveillance, but they couldn't give up on their mission. Even in their fear, their desire to find out the truth and help Irene remained strong. Meanwhile, Irene, tormented by the loss of her son in her own research, soon discovered another shocking fact. She learned that her son was killed not just because of the artifact, but because he knew about the plans concerning Mia. This discovery shook her to the core. She realized that Mia and Angela's actions could be used against them. Irene turned to them for help, as her own resources were exhausted. At this point, fate brought them to an unexpected connection with the events that had happened earlier. Remembering the white homeless man named John to whom Mia had given the sandwich, Angela began to suspect that he might have some connection to the current events. She and Mia decided to find out what had happened to John since their last meeting. They started looking for information about John. After a few days, they managed to find a person who had seen John after he left the park. This person told them that John was found dead in an abandoned building and a note with Mia and Angela's name was found on his body. This shocked them to the core. They realized that John could be more than just a random homeless person and that his death could be related to their investigation. Torn between fear and guilt, Mia and Angela continued to search for clues. They learned that John was not just a random passerby, but a man who might be connected to a secret society. He might know more than they could have imagined. His death might have been an attempt to disguise the real goals of those behind it all. At John's funeral, Mia and Angela rethink their actions and decide to take safety and planning even more seriously. They realize that everything they did put them and others at risk, and that their investigation has led to tragic consequences. As they prepared for their next move, they began to receive new threats. The threats became more personal and threatening. They knew they were in a dangerous game, and that every action they took could have deadly consequences. The guilt over John's death and the risk to Irene and others only made them more determined to get to the bottom of the situation. In the middle of all this darkness, as they continued to work on uncovering secrets, there came a moment that made them rethink everything that had happened. One evening, Mia and Angela received a message that their apartment had been ransacked again, but this time, there was something strange in the mess. They found a note from a man who turned out to be a member of a secret society, and who had left it there to show that they were under control. The note contained only a few words: "You have not seen everything yet. What you seek will lead you to even greater suffering. Pay the price for what you have done." These words echoed in their heads as they continued their fight. Every step in their investigation could be their last, and each day brought new challenges and dangers. John's death, Irene's loss of her son, and the continuing threats made them realize that their actions not only risked their own safety, but could also lead to further tragedies. They realized that they could not stop, and that their investigation led them to even darker and more dangerous corners of history, where every discovery was connected to human lives and destinies that they could not ignore. With each passing day, Mia and Angela's investigation became more dangerous. They sensed that they would soon find themselves in the middle of something much larger and more destructive. The losses they faced and the threats they had to endure were pulling them into a depth of darkness from which it was increasingly difficult to escape. After they learned of the death of John, the man Mia gave the sandwich to, they realized that his death was not an accident. John was an important part of a more complex scheme, and his death was part of something much bigger. This realization added an additional sense of guilt and anxiety to them. They began to look more closely into the connections between John and the secret society to see how his death could be related to their investigation. Mia and Angela went back to the documents they had found at the observatory and looked through them again, trying to find any references to John. In one of the ancient manuscripts, Angela discovered that John's name was mentioned in the context of an ancient ritual involving the use of an artifact. This discovery was shocking. John may not have been just a random person, but part of a ritual that had been activated or disrupted. Irene, still shaken by her son's death, also began to connect her observations to the events surrounding John. She learned that her son had previously crossed paths with John in search of information about ancient artifacts, and that they may have worked together to uncover some secrets. Irene theorized that John might not simply be a homeless person, but someone who was the victim of a more complex game. One evening, after a long day of investigation and searching, Mia and Angela received disturbing news. One of their trusted contacts informed them that their actions had attracted the attention of more dangerous people, and that they should be prepared for new threats. This message was accompanied by fragments of information that John may have known more than they realized, and that his death was a consequence of his attempts to hide the truth. Mia and Angela decided to visit the place where John was found to try to find more evidence. When they arrived, they were shocked by how everything had been left in a hurry. Torn things, signs of a struggle, and vague clues. They found a small notebook that John seemed to be carrying with him. It had dates, names, and notes written on it, indicating that he was trying to gather information about what was going on around the artifact and the secret society. The notebook made it clear that John was part of a complex network of people trying to protect the artifact from abuse. His death was a warning to those who tried to unravel its mysteries. Mia and Angela realized that they had become part of this dangerous world, and that their search had led them to the center of sinister events. As they continued their investigation, they began to notice that their actions were starting to lead to new tragic consequences. Their searches led to several innocent people who were accidentally involved becoming victims as well. This only added to the guilt and pressure they were feeling. Irene, investigating further, discovered that her son had left behind a clue that could help solve the puzzle. But the clue was tied to an ancient ritual that required sacrifice and was known only to a select few. Irene realized that her son may have been trying to prevent the artifact from being used for selfish purposes, and that his death was a consequence of his attempts to protect it from those who wanted to use its power. With each new discovery, Mia and Angela realized that their path was becoming more twisted and tragic. Their investigation had led to much suffering and loss, and they began to doubt whether they could find a way out of this dark web. On one of those dark days, when they returned to their apartment again, they found their personal belongings cut and torn. On the wall, written in blood, was a message: "You will not stop until you pay the full price." This reminder of their constant danger and the tragic consequences of their actions was a heavy blow. Mia and Angela knew they had to keep moving forward despite the fear and guilt, but every decision and every step they took was filled with the fear of what might happen. John's death and the many other tragedies they had experienced were not only a warning, but also the realization that their investigation had drawn them into a complex and dangerous world, where every new discovery could lead to even more suffering. The story became more and more complicated and tragic. Mia and Angela felt increasing pressure and fear, which was accompanied not only by threats, but also by public pressure. Their investigation attracted the attention of people not only interested in the artifact, but also those who used their work for their own selfish purposes. As Mia and Angela continued to solve mysteries, their work and their actions began to be discussed on social media and local news. Unfortunately, some of the public attention they received was tinged with racial undertones. Several articles and comments online began to point out that their work was the cause of public problems and anxiety, and often these accusations had racial undertones. An article in a local newspaper that was distributed throughout the city claimed that Mia and Angela's investigation had led to civil unrest and an increase in crime. The article did not specifically mention that the investigation involved ancient artifacts and secret societies, but instead focused on how black women were causing negative consequences for society. These articles and comments became a catalyst for growing negativity towards Mia and Angela in their community. One day, when Mia returned home from school, she found her front porch covered in insults and threats. The graffiti on the wall read, "Strangers among us, our problem." Angela, who was determined to protect her daughter and continue the investigation, noticed that their neighbors began to avoid them and whisper behind their backs. Multiple threats were made both by phone and through messages on social media. The anxiety for her daughter's safety and well-being put Angela in a state of deep stress. Irene, who had also suffered personal tragedies and was under pressure after her son's death, began to notice that her own efforts to help Mia and Angela were beginning to raise suspicion and resentment among her acquaintances and friends. She was surprised and disappointed by the way society responded to her attempts to uncover truth and justice, especially given the racist comments and attitudes they encountered. One such day, when Mia and Angela returned from yet another investigation, they discovered that their apartment had been broken into again. However, this time it was even worse. Some things had been damaged, and more threats and racist remarks related to their race and activities had been left on the wall. Mia, feeling pain and fear, expressed her feelings in a journal she kept to cope with anxiety and pressure. She wrote about the challenges of being a black girl in a world where their actions are judged and criticized simply because of their skin color. She also wrote about her internal struggle with guilt over the consequences of her research and how public opinion and racist attitudes only exacerbate their suffering. Angela, despite all the threats and challenges, continued to support Mia and their investigation, but she, too, began to feel the pressure mounting. She understood that their work could have far-reaching consequences, but she also realized that public sentiment and racial bias added further complexity to their situation. Amid these challenges, Mia and Angela realized that they were not only facing threats from those who wanted to use the artifact for their own selfish purposes, but also social stigma that only made their struggle more difficult. Their investigation had tragic consequences, and the racist attitudes they faced only added pain and fear to their already difficult lives. Irene was more determined than ever to find the truth about what had happened to her son, while also fighting against those who exploited racism and prejudice for their own ends. She knew that despite the personal loss and public pressure, their fight for justice and truth must continue. In this difficult era, every step was full of dangers, and Mia, Angela and Irene knew that their path would be thorny. Confronting dark forces and social prejudices became an integral part of their struggle. With each new discovery and each new challenge, they continued to fight, hoping that one day the truth would prevail and justice would be restored. As Mia and Angela's story grew and gained more attention, the negative public perception continued to mount. Racist sentiments within their community became more and more visible. The spread of misinformation and bias played a role in deepening their problems. Despite Mia and Angela's efforts to continue their investigation, their work became increasingly difficult and dangerous. New threats came in, and their living conditions worsened. Locals who had previously supported them began to reject them, and those who did not share their opinions began to speak out against them. One day, while returning home after a long day of research, Mia and Angela encountered a new threat. Their apartment had been vandalized, with racist slogans and insults written on the walls. The infamous graffiti included phrases such as "not our society" and "out of our streets." Rumors began to spread in the neighborhood that their actions and attempts to uncover the truth about the secret society were only making matters worse. Mia, seeing this, felt a growing sense of anxiety and injustice overwhelm her. She understood that their investigation had not only led to tragedies and threats from malevolent forces, but also caused even greater public outcry. Public accusations only worsened their suffering, and racist sentiments became increasingly hostile. At school, Mia became the target of teasing and bullying from her peers. Some kids began to avoid her, and her teachers, succumbing to social pressure, also began to show prejudice. Mia felt her isolation growing, and this only added to her pain and stress. Angela, in turn, was facing difficulties at work. She noticed that her colleagues and clients were becoming dissatisfied, and her social contacts were decreasing. Rumors began to spread at her workplace that she and her daughter were involved with criminal elements. This created additional pressure and stress in her life. Irene, who continued to fight for the truth about her son's death, also faced new challenges. Rumors and prejudices about Mia and Angela began to affect her own reputation and safety. She noticed that her social connections were beginning to crumble, and her efforts to support Mia and Angela only added to the pressure on her own life. Suddenly, Irene received a message from an unknown sender. It said that her son may have left behind important clues that could help reveal the truth, but only if she could understand the situation they were in. The message was written on old parchment and had the same symbols as the ones they had seen earlier. It also hinted that their investigation had attracted the attention of more dangerous forces. One night, as Mia and Angela were preparing for another search raid, their apartment was surrounded by a group of aggressive people who began shouting racist slogans and threatening them. This situation became the culmination of growing social tension. Mia and Angela felt trapped, their sense of security completely violated. However, their determination to continue the investigation only grew stronger. They knew they could not afford to back down. Despite the dangers and public pressure, they continued to gather evidence and try to solve the mysteries, hoping that they could uncover the truth and perhaps change public opinion. Mia and Angela began looking for ways to make their investigation less visible to the outside world in order to minimize the negative impact and focus on their ultimate goal. They also found support from several trusted people who were willing to help them in their fight for truth and justice. Together with Irene, they continued to decipher ancient symbols and traces that led them to new clues and discoveries. But each new discovery was accompanied by new threats and risks. They were confident that their investigation could lead to the solution of great mysteries, but they also realized that they faced real dangers and prejudices at every step. The story of Mia, Angela and Irene became increasingly complex and tragic. Their fight for justice and truth was associated with numerous difficulties and contradictions. In their investigation, full of dangers and challenges, they continued to search for the path to the truth, despite the obstacles and social prejudices that complicated their lives. The anxiety and fear that Mia and Angela faced only increased as their investigation progressed. The atmosphere around them became more and more threatening. In the darkened darkness of their apartment, as they reviewed the evidence they had found, a cold fear filled their hearts. Each new discovery seemed more sinister and dangerous. One night, as Angela was preparing to leave for a meeting with Irene to discuss the latest findings, they heard strange sounds coming from the hallway. At first, they were just light footsteps, but soon they became louder and more insistent. Mia, clinging to her mother, felt her heart beat faster. They both knew it could just be a coincidence, but an intuitive feeling told them that danger was near. When they opened the door to check what was going on, they found a strange object lying on the floor in the hallway, a black envelope with their names written on it. Their hearts began to beat in time. Angela took the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was an old, yellowed piece of paper with a handwritten text. "You are getting closer to something you cannot control. Be careful. Your fate is already sealed." Mia and Angela read these words with horror. They felt fear creeping up on them, as if someone was watching their every move. Soon after, they began to notice that they were being watched. Night after night, they heard creaking sounds and footsteps that they couldn't explain. The lights in the apartment would occasionally flicker, creating an ominous atmosphere. Things got worse when Angela came home one day to find that someone had ransacked their apartment. At first glance, it looked like nothing was missing, but in fact, some things were rearranged and there was a note on the shelf with a new warning: "Your curiosity will lead you to even greater suffering." Irene was alarmed when she learned of this. She herself began to receive anonymous calls and letters containing threatening messages. One of them contained a photo of her son and the text: "His death was only the beginning. Will you be ready for the next step?" Irene began to suspect that her life and the lives of her family were also under threat. Her every move was closely watched, and she became more cautious. avoiding public places and potential witnesses. An incredible fear took hold of her, and she began to doubt who among her circle could be involved in these threats. Mia and Angela began receiving letters that informed them that they should abandon their investigation. Each letter mentioned the dangers that would follow them if they continued to search for the truth. These letters were written with the express purpose of intimidating them into giving up their plans. One night, when the fear was at its peak, Angela noticed that someone was watching their apartment. A shadow peered out the window, but quickly disappeared when she turned on the light. Fear took over her completely. She realized that their safety was at risk and that their investigation might have led them into a trap from which they would have difficulty escaping. The day they planned to make a new discovery turned out to be the scariest. Irene, Mia and Angela gathered in the apartment to discuss the important evidence they had found. Suddenly, the lights went out and the room was plunged into complete darkness. At that moment, they heard heavy breathing and footsteps approaching them. The three of them's hearts began to beat faster. Irene, Mia, and Angela felt the darkness of the situation around them become almost tangible. Not knowing what to do, they turned on their flashlights and began to search for the source of the threat. But darkness and fear continued to fill the space around them. Every new step in their investigation was now associated with constant fear and danger. All their actions were covered in the darkness of the unknown and anxiety. Each new discovery and each new warning only increased the sense of inevitable tragedy. Their fight for the truth became not just a fight against a secret society and its dangerous plans, but also a constant fight against their own fears and the prejudices of the surrounding world. Fear for their lives and the lives of their loved ones, as well as the danger they felt at every step, became an integral part of their painful path. They knew that their investigation could lead to tragic consequences, but they could not back down until they found answers to all the questions and revealed the whole truth. As the fear and tension continued to mount, Mia, Angela and Irene felt the pressure mounting from all sides. They were consumed with the investigation, unaware that every attempt to solve the mystery was plunging them deeper into a dark web that could not be broken. One night, after yet another horrific incident in which their apartment was damaged, Mia looked around and noticed an old newspaper that had fallen out of one of the boxes of documents. It had a colorful cover with a picture of John, the homeless man she had once given a sandwich to. On the front page of the paper was an article about his death. However, the article not only said that John had been found dead, but also that his death could be connected to a secret society, and even to the death of Irene's son. Mia and Angela were shocked. They remembered John sitting on a park bench and asking Mia for help, and it had such a meaning. They had no idea that this man could be connected to something so big and dangerous. Irene was also shocked. John, it turned out, was an important element in her investigation. She remembered her son mentioning John in his notes. He wasn't just a homeless person, but somehow connected to the ritual or artifact they were trying to decipher. Perhaps John's death was the result of knowing too much, and his actions were aimed at protecting something very important. Mia and Angela decided to investigate the last days of John's life to understand what could have led to his death. They returned to the same park where they had once met John. The park looked empty and abandoned, and the fear they felt only intensified. They remembered that John often sat on a bench, and decided to start there. On the bench where John usually sat, they found several traces of old, battered objects that appeared to belong to John. Among them was an old book, wrapped in plastic. When they opened it, they discovered that it was a diary. Inside the diary were notes about John's monitoring of the artifact and the actions of people who might be involved in guarding it. The journal contained many entries about John trying to protect the artifact from abuse. He described encounters with various people who tried to use its power for their own selfish purposes. John also mentioned feeling unsafe and that his life was being threatened. Mia and Angela read the notes. They realized that John actually knew more than they could have imagined. His death may have been part of a larger plan they were trying to uncover. This added a new dimension to their investigation, revealing that John was not just a victim, but an active participant in efforts to protect the world from an ancient evil. Irene, looking through John's notes, noticed that some of the meetings and events mentioned matched moments in her own investigation. She discovered that her son had also been trying to find and contact John in the last days of his life. Perhaps her son and John were closer than she thought, and perhaps they were both trying to prevent something far more sinister. Suddenly, while exploring, Mia noticed that someone was watching them. She saw a dark figure flashing through the trees. Feeling fear growing, they decided that they could not stay in the park for too long and quickly returned to the apartment. That evening, when they returned home, they found that their research work had been completely destroyed. The documents had been torn up and the evidence of their search had been destroyed. The writing on the wall of their apartment had reappeared. "You are digging too deep. This is not your place." The realization that John might be trying to protect them from something they didn't fully understand only added tension to their struggle. They knew that uncovering the truth about John and his connection to the artifact could be the key to solving their investigation, but they also knew that it could put their lives at even greater risk. With each new discovery and each new threat, fear became an integral part of their lives. They understood that their investigation led them to deeper and more dangerous secrets, and that every step they took was full of risk and uncertainty. The shadow of fear continued to engulf Mia and Angela, and their investigation became even darker and more dangerous. The fear was not only in the nightly alarms and threatening recordings, but also in their personal interactions with the world around them. Now they knew that the homeless John was not just a casual acquaintance, but a key figure in their solution. One night, while searching through John's papers for new evidence, Angela noticed that tucked among the pages of the diary was another item, an old letter. It was written in a sloppy handwriting and looked as if it had been kept in a pocket. The letter contained a warning from John: "If you are reading this, it means I have failed to protect you, but know that what I have tried to prevent is far from what you can imagine. Follow my final steps, and you will see that the truth is far more dangerous than you realize." These words came as a real shock to Mia and Angela. They began to ponder John's last days and his possible actions, trying to figure out what exactly he was trying to protect. In his journal, John often mentioned his interactions with other homeless people, sometimes indicating that they could be connected to his protection. They decided to return to the park where John spent most of his time. The park became more than just a place where they found his belongings, but a place that seemed to hold clues. They approached the local homeless people, trying to find out what they might know about John. Unfortunately, their efforts were met with silence and suspicion. The homeless people did not trust them and were afraid to talk about John, who became the object of suspicion and even threats. One night, during such a meeting, Mia and Angela encountered one of the oldest homeless people in the area, named Matt. Matt, with gray hair and puffy eyes, was known for knowing many people from the surrounding streets. After much coaxing and offers of help, Matt finally agreed to tell them what he knew. Matt reported that John was an important figure among the homeless, but not only because of his kindness. He often mentioned that he knew secrets that could change everything, and even received mysterious messages that he did not show to anyone. Matt also recalled that in his last days, John often talked about how his life was in danger and that he was willing to do anything to protect something important. During their conversation, Matt began to look increasingly tense. He suddenly became cautious, as if something was troubling him. Mia and Angela noticed that his fear was genuine. Matt suggested that they come see him later so he could share any final details about John. He warned them that it could be dangerous, but that they needed to know the truth. As Matt left, Mia and Angela felt the fear and anxiety growing. They knew they were getting close to uncovering something important, but they also knew it could have serious consequences. Later that night, Matt contacted them again. He called them to the edge of the park, to a place that looked abandoned and gloomy. In the deep shadows, among old woodwork and debris, he revealed a strange find: an old, battered suitcase, hidden under dirt and leaves. Matt explained that the suitcase had once belonged to John. Inside, they found several old notes and personal items that showed that John was involved in more complex matters than they could have imagined. These items included old photographs, documents, and even fragments of some ancient text. One of the photographs showed a group of people, including John, as well as several unknown individuals in dark hoods. Matt said that John was always afraid for his life because he knew that his knowledge could threaten not only him but also other people involved in the case. John tried to pass on his information to protect those who could be in danger. Matt also mentioned that John was involved in some kind of ritual involving an ancient artifact that he was trying to disarm. Mia and Angela were shocked by this revelation. They realized that John was indeed part of a much more complex and dangerous network than they could have ever imagined. His death was perhaps part of some darker plan that they were now embroiled in. Fear became an integral part of their investigation. They knew that each new discovery could lead to new threats and dangers, but they also knew that solving John's mystery could lead them to the truth, which could possibly reveal secrets about the ancient artifact and the shadow forces threatening them. Each step of their investigation became more dangerous, and they realized that they had to be prepared for any surprises that might await them along the way. Fear for their own safety and the lives of their loved ones became a constant companion, but also an incentive to continue searching for the truth, despite all the threats and dangers. That night, when Mia and Angela returned home with John's suitcase, they felt the darkness that surrounded their lives grow even thicker. They sat in their small kitchen, examining the objects they had found by the dim light of the lamp. Each thing, each document, seemed to hide some secret that would not leave them alone. Angela laid out all the objects carefully on the table, their fingers trembling with tension. Among all the things they found, there was one letter that immediately caught their attention. It was handwritten, the handwriting as sloppy as the first letter they had found in the diary. The letter read, "I know I am being watched. I feel their shadow around every corner. If you are reading this, it means I can no longer protect myself, but know that the key to solving everything is not here. It is where it all began." These words made Mia and Angela wary. What did John mean by the place where it all began? It was obvious that he knew more than they could guess, and now they needed to find out what this place was. The next morning, they decided to meet Matt again to find out more. When they arrived at the park, they found Matt had disappeared. The homeless people who used to live there had all but vanished, leaving the park looking emptier and more ominous than ever. On the bench where Matt usually sat, they found only one thing, the book that John always kept with him. Back home, they began to study the book with even greater zeal. Within its pages, they found a map of an old part of town that was now abandoned. The map showed one house, surrounded by arrows and marks that John had obviously made himself. The house was on the edge of town, in an area that had once been prosperous but had now fallen into oblivion. Mia and Angela knew they had to go there. Despite all the dangers, they felt that this place could be the key to solving this whole dark story. But as they prepared for this dangerous expedition, their fear grew. When they arrived, they found that the house did indeed look abandoned. The walls were covered in mold, the windows were broken, and there were wild bushes growing around that seemed to be guarding the place. Despite the gloomy atmosphere, they felt they had to go inside. The inside of the house was even more frightening. The old, creaky floors, dusty rooms, and strange symbols painted on the walls made their hearts beat faster. They felt an ominous presence, as if the house itself was a living being watching them. In one of the rooms they found an old chest, locked with a rusty padlock. Inside the chest, among old newspapers and torn pages, was another diary, a diary that belonged to John. In this diary, John described in detail his journey and his attempts to prevent something terrible from happening to this house. From his notes, they learned that the house had once belonged to a man who was connected to the ritual John had mentioned. The man was obsessed with the power of the artifact, and John tried to stop him. However, as John got closer to solving the mystery, he was pursued by shadows, people who wanted to keep the secrets of the place and destroy anyone who tried to reveal them. With every word, with every page of the diary, Mia and Angela realized more and more that their lives were now in danger. They realized that all those warnings they had received were not just threats, but real dangers. Now they knew that John's secrets affected not only his life, but their own as well. At one point, as they were deep in their reading, they heard the creaking of the floors outside the room. Mia and Angela's eyes met, realizing they were not alone. An uneasy silence filled the house, and they froze, listening to every sound. The footsteps were getting closer, and something began to move in the darkness. Panic gripped them, leaving the journal and the chest behind. They decided they had to leave immediately, but when they opened the door to run out of the room, the same figure they had seen before stood before them, a tall man with a hood covering his face. Mia and Angela froze in fear, realizing that they were now in the middle of what John had been trying to protect them from. Mia and Angela froze, their hearts pounding, as the tall, hooded man slowly approached them. In the dim light of the old house, his face was hidden, and only his figure seemed to fill the entire doorway. Fear gripped them so strongly that they could barely breathe. Time seemed to stand still. The man took a step forward and a hoarse voice came from under the hood. "You shouldn't have come here." Angela, feeling the cold sweat running down her back, squeezed Mia's hand. She knew they had to think of something fast to get out of here alive. But before she could say anything, the stranger continued. "John knew too much. He tried to stop us, but now you are the continuation of his work. You know too much, and it could cost you your lives." Angela gathered her courage and said, "We don't want problems. We just want to know the truth. John was a good man. He didn't deserve what happened to him." The figure paused, looking thoughtful for a moment. Then the man slowly raised his hands and pulled down his hood. Before them stood a middle-aged man with deep wrinkles on his face and tired but penetrating eyes. He looked as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said, looking down, "but when you get involved with the dark forces, they don't let go. John was my friend. We tried to stop what was started all those years ago, but we couldn't. Now that darkness, that artifact we tried to hide, is awakening, and all John left you with is your last hope of stopping it." Mia and Angela felt the tension ease a little, but the fear still lingered. The man looked at them seriously and continued, "You must understand that this artifact is not just an ancient object. It is connected to forces that no one should awaken. If you continue your investigation, you risk awakening something that will destroy everything you know and love. But if you stop now, you have a chance to save yourself." Angela thought about it, but then shook her head decisively. "We can't just walk away and leave this as is. John wanted us to finish what he started. We have to figure out how to stop this for good." The man sighed, but then nodded, realizing that their decision was immutable. "Very well," he said, "I will help you, but know that from now on you will have to act quickly and carefully. We have little time, and the darkness has already awakened." He led them to an old map they had found in John's chest. The map had several points marked on it that turned out to be important nodes to protect the artifact. The man explained that these locations were used to seal the artifact's power, but over time the seals had weakened. "We need to restore these seals," he explained. "It's the only way to finally neutralize the artifact and stop the evil that is trying to awaken." Mia and Angela knew their path would be dangerous, but they had no choice. They began their journey through these points, each one more difficult and dangerous than the last. As they restored the seals, they felt the darkness around them become more tangible. Eventually, they came to the last place, the most dangerous point on the map. It was an old temple, lost in the dense forests on the outskirts of the city, which was rumored to have been built in ancient times to worship the powers contained in the artifact. As they entered the temple, the air around them became heavy, filled with something ancient and evil. Here they felt that their entire investigation was coming to an end. The man who was leading them stopped at the very center of the temple, where a strange symbol was inscribed on the floor. He explained that the final seal was located here, and that restoring it would require all their effort and concentration. Working together, they began the ritual that would restore the seal and seal the artifact forever. As they continued, the temple began to vibrate, as if resisting their actions, but they did not stop, knowing that everything was at stake now. Finally, with the last word of the ritual, the temple fell silent and the darkness that had filled the air began to recede. The silence that followed was deafening. Mia and Angela felt the tension ease and a sense of relief return to them. Their investigation, filled with fear and tragedy, had finally come to an end. But they knew they had to live with what they had experienced, and that John's story would stay with them forever. The man who had helped them thanked them and told them they could now return to their lives. But even after they returned home, they felt changed forever, and that their connection to what had happened would never allow them to forget it completely. After the ritual was complete, the silence in the temple was eerie. Mia and Angela stood in the center of the ancient symbol, feeling their hearts slowly slow down after the turbulent events. The man who had helped them throughout this journey looked exhausted, but there was relief in his eyes. It seemed as if the darkness had retreated, and the danger had passed. However, as they made their way home, unsettling thoughts began to creep into Angela's mind. Something about the silence seemed unnatural, as if it were just the calm before the storm. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was left unfinished. Despite these concerns, Mia and Angela tried to return to their normal lives. They began to go about their daily routines again, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't go away. A few days passed, and everything seemed to be back to normal. But one night, when Mia had already gone to bed, Angela heard a strange sound behind the door of their apartment. At first she thought it was just the neighbor's cat, but the sound was repeated, becoming more insistent. She went to the door and carefully looked through the peephole, but saw nothing. When she opened the door, there was no one in front of her, only a dark, empty corridor. But suddenly she noticed an old envelope on the floor, almost the same as the one they found at John's. Angela's heart began to pound. She picked up the envelope and quickly walked back into the apartment, closing the door tightly behind her. Inside was a single piece of paper, scrawled in scrawled handwriting. You thought this was the end? This is just the beginning. Angela felt a cold fear wash over her. She realized that the darkness they had been fighting was not gone. The next morning, Mia was awakened by a loud knock on the door. Angela was already on her feet, her heart filled with anxiety. When she opened the door, 2 police officers were standing on the threshold. One of them, a tall man with a hard look, addressed her. "Mrs. Johnson, we have questions for you and your daughter. Can you come with us?" Angela froze. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't imagine that their lives would be turned upside down again. The police escorted them to the car, and as they sat in the back seat, Mia and Angela felt fear slowly filling their hearts. They were taken to the police station, where they were placed in a small room with gray walls. The air was tense, and the police left them alone without explanation. Time dragged on painfully slowly. Finally, the door opened and the same hooded man who had accompanied them to the temple entered. This time he was wearing a police uniform, and his face was icy calm. "I warned you," he said coldly. "You shouldn't have interfered. Now things have gotten worse." Angela glanced at Mia, who was shaking with fear. She tried to protect her daughter, but realized that they were trapped with no way out. The man came closer, and his eyes seemed to pierce right through them. "You have awakened something that should not have been awakened. Now it cannot be stopped, and you will pay for it." Angela tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. She knew their situation was hopeless. The policeman leaned closer to Mia, and his voice became quiet, almost a whisper. "That artifact you were playing with is not just an ancient object. It is the key to a power that was meant to remain forgotten. John tried to hide it, but you destroyed his work. Now your life will be the price for it." Mia started crying and Angela couldn't take it anymore and tried to get up, but the policeman held her in place. "You do not understand the depth of the darkness you have awakened. Now they will come for you, and no one will be able to protect you." With these words, he left the room, leaving them in complete despair. They were soon released, but fear and despair became their constant companions. Returning home, they discovered that their apartment had been ransacked. All their things turned upside down, but the most terrible thing was that in the middle of the room on the floor lay the very artifact that they had thought was sealed. Angela realized that their fight was not over, but only beginning, and now they were targets for forces that could not be awakened. Left in their dark and ruined home, they knew that the darkness was everywhere, and that their lives would never be the same again. Angela stood in the middle of the destroyed apartment, looking at the artifact that seemed to have awakened the darkness once again. An internal coldness gripped her heart, but at the same time, she felt a surge of determination. She knew that there was nowhere left to retreat. There was no point in running, the darkness would find them everywhere. The only way forward was to meet this evil head-on and try to stop it once and for all. Mia sat on the couch, huddled close to her mother, her eyes full of tears and fear. Angela stroked her head, trying to convey at least a little calm. "Mia, I promise you we can do this. We can do this together," she whispered, trying to instill confidence in her daughter, although deep down she barely believed her own words. Angela knew the artifact had to be destroyed, but she didn't know how. She remembered the policeman's words, that they had awakened powers that were meant to remain forgotten. There was only one option left: to turn to the man who had tried to warn them. Despite his threats, he might be their last chance. Gathering all her strength, Angela called the police, hoping to get in touch with the same policeman who came to them that night. A man's voice came through the receiver, and to her surprise, it was the same man. "Do you want to meet again?" he asked, his voice cold, but there was some hidden sadness in it. "Yes," Angela replied. "You said we woke this up. Help us stop it." "We didn't mean to. We just want to protect our loved ones." The policeman was silent for a long time before answering. "Do you know that this will cost you your life?" "I know," Angela said quietly, feeling tears welling up in her eyes, "but I'd do anything for my daughter." The policeman agreed to meet them and named the place. It was an old abandoned church on the outskirts of the city. There, he said, they could finally destroy the artifact and try to stop the darkness. When they reached the church, the night was waning, and the gray pre-dawn sky made the place seem even more ominous. It was silent inside, only the sound of footsteps echoing. A policeman was waiting for them at the altar, an ancient manuscript covered in ancient symbols laid out before him. "This is the last chance," he said, barely glancing at them. "This ritual can destroy the artifact, but it requires a sacrifice." Angela immediately understood what he was talking about. "Me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes," he replied, not taking his eyes off the manuscript. "The artifact is bound to the one who awakened it. It requires a sacrifice to close the gate that is opened. If you are ready, we can begin." Mia, hearing these words, was frightened and hugged her mother, begging her not to do it. Angela felt her heart breaking with pain, but she knew there was no other way out. "Mia, my dear," she said, kneeling before her daughter, "I will always be with you. Even if I am gone, you must be strong, live on, and remember that I have always loved you more than anything in the world." Mia cried, but she knew her mother had made a decision. Angela stood up and walked to the altar. The policeman began to chant in an ancient language, and the air in the church began to thicken. The artifact on the altar began to glow with a dark, gloomy light that filled the room. As the ritual reached its climax, Angela felt the darkness begin to surround her. At the last moment, before the light completely consumed her, she managed to see her daughter's face and hear her scream. And then, suddenly, everything went silent. The light disappeared, and the church was plunged into complete silence. The artifact lay broken into pieces, no longer emitting darkness. The policeman watched silently, knowing that it was finally over. Mia fell to her knees near where her mother stood. The policeman walked up to her and, sitting down next to her, said quietly, "Your mother saved us all. Her sacrifice was necessary. Now the darkness no longer threatens us." Mia couldn't believe what had happened. She felt incredible pain, but she also understood that her mother had saved everyone by giving her life. The policeman helped Mia stand up, and they slowly walked out of the church. It was getting light outside. The world around her seemed to be the same, but for Mia everything had changed forever. She knew that she had to continue living to honor her mother's memory and never forget her heroism. The darkness receded, but the price they paid was too high. Mia, supported by a policeman, headed home, leaving behind the church where her mother sacrificed herself to save the world. The story is very emotional and dramatic. It combines elements of mysticism, horror and deep human drama. The tragedy in which the mother sacrifices herself to save her daughter and the world adds incredible emotional heaviness, and the fight against dark forces increases the tension and mystical atmosphere. The plot shows how even the smallest and seemingly insignificant actions can lead to huge consequences. It reveals the theme of sacrifice, love and the willingness to do anything for your loved ones. The ending, although tragic, leaves a feeling of completion and emphasizes the power of motherly love, which can defeat even the darkest forces. What is also impressive is the gradual buildup of tension and fear that follows the characters from start to finish. There is something in this story that touches the soul, making you think about what people are ready to do for their loved ones, and how you can find the strength to withstand the most terrible trials. What do you think? That's it. The darkness has receded, but the price was too high. How do you feel after this story? Write your impressions. I'm very interested in how you perceive this ending. If you like this story and you want to hear more like it, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to click the bell so you don't miss new videos. Thank you for being with me until the end of this amazing and tragic story.